Picture sitting on your couch for years, watching a family on television, smiling, laughing, sharing milestones, and saying to yourself, wow, that's a picture-perfect life. That's how viewers perceived the Brown family. Kody Brown and his wives had it all. Love, harmony, and the type of family life everyone dreams of having. But suppose I told you that one of the apparently peaceful and devoted wives, Robyn Brown, had a secret agenda. An agenda that might have destroyed all she had created with Kody. Yes, Robyn, who was so frequently credited with sticking by Kody's side no matter what, wasn't always as faithful as the cameras made her look. Behind the closed doors, behind those fake smiles, and behind that collected exterior, there were some thoughts that even the most faithful viewers might find shocking. Thoughts of an escape, insecurities about the marriage, and a need to take care of herself in ways that no one on television could possibly perceive. By the end of the session, you'll see Robyn not only as the placid, faithful wife you think you know, but as a dynamic woman, cautiously weighing love, loyalty, and self-preservation, confronted with a choice that might have altered the entire Brown family saga. Life at the Brown house has never been an easy balance. Handling several marriages, kids, money, and appearances is never easy. Robyn, as well as the other wives, had her own set of duties, but she always seemed more tranquil than the others. To viewers, this tranquility meant unshakable devotion, but in reality, Robyn's calm was somewhat a disguise, a method of keeping things in check while struggling with her inner concerns. It began quietly. Discussions of money, homes, and family priorities grew more strained. Kody's choices would sometimes appear to be on a whim or grossly slanted toward what he wanted, forcing the wives to continually compromise. For Robyn, small annoyances initially evolved into big worries. She saw patterns developing that made her question not only the family structure, but also her own happiness. Think about the life you've built for yourself. Now imagine feeling like it could crumble, not because of anyone else, but because you're starting to doubt the very foundation of your closest relationships. That's where Robyn found herself. Behind the polite nods and reassuring smiles, she was quietly evaluating whether her loyalty to Kody was sustainable, or whether she needed a plan to protect herself if things went wrong. Robyn wasn't reactive. She didn't react right away to these emotions. She started observing instead, watching family dynamics, hearing the underlying tensions between Kody and the other wives, and seeing how things were decided. Friends who knew her well picked up on changes in tone, brief lags in conversation, and the way she would occasionally go absent during intense debates. These quiet moments spoke volumes, lines the TV cameras never captured. She observed moments where Kody's control put pressure on others, moments where voices were silenced, and moments where compromises were imposed on the wives without regard for their viewpoints. For Robyn, these weren't minor complaints, they were warning signs. Here's the surprising part. All the while that viewers were watching Robyn stand faithfully by Kody's side, in private she was second-guessing it all. She asked herself, am I really happy? Am I giving up my own happiness for the sake of appearances? That was a question that dominated her mind, working quietly on thoughts that would ultimately bring about a secret plan that none could have anticipated. Loyalty is usually hailed on the reality show, but it has its own burden. Being loyal was not always a cakewalk for Robyn. She adored her family, particularly her children, but the pressure to constantly juggle her needs with what Kody and the world expected of her crushed her. In times of isolation, Robyn pondered her place. She questioned herself with tough questions. What if I made my happiness second best for the rest of my life? What if I am faithful and it takes me everything in my life personally? These thoughts weren't acts of betrayal. They were acts of a conscientious, smart woman, attempting to make sense of an extremely tangled existence. Picture having a secret so heavy, so intimate, that it might alter the way the world perceives you, or your family. Robyn's second-guessing was that secret. As much as viewers were in awe of her poise, she worked behind the scenes with the nagging fear that her allegiance might eventually demand an uncomfortable decision: remain or depart. The fractures were not always dramatic. There were subtle hints, the occasional hesitation in agreeing with Kody, the soft sigh when home conversations became heated, and those times when she was emotionally far away. To the casual observer, these could have been anything. But to those who knew her, these hinted at internal strategy, a woman quietly strategizing for what may or may not be. Even on family outings, or in public events, Robyn's thoughts usually drifted about issues of stability and independence. She couldn't help but think about how she would cope if ever she had to leave, so her children and herself would be stable. Although sounding calculated, it was really a matter of self-preservation. She is not just the placid, obedient wife standing behind Kody. She is a bright, reflective woman, dealing with repressed frustrations, observing tensions under her breath, and weighing her choices for the future. Have you ever noticed that quiet, nagging tension in your life? Those small things that don't amount to much at first, but gradually begin to bear down on you. That is precisely what Robyn Brown felt over the years. Behind the cameras, behind the dutifully scripted family meals, and behind her placid mask, tension was growing, tension that went largely unnoticed, but which would influence her future in dramatic ways. While everyone perceived her as the dutiful, loyal wife, Robyn's personal reality was not the same. She started questioning her status in the family, her own happiness, and if her loyalty was being taken for granted. The reality is, at times even the strongest of loyalties are put to test, not through grand arguments, but through constant, insidious pressures that build quietly over the years. And for Robyn, they were creating a tough decision: be faithful or defend herself by backing off. Life with Kody Brown has never been easy. Balancing multiple wives, kids, and public appearances is stressful enough, and even the most committed wife can sense the weight of doing so. For Robyn, the weight was added to by Kody's controlling personality and his sometimes solo decision-making. It was not merely differences regarding money or possessions. There were persistent issues within domestic duties, family values, and communication patterns. Robyn started to see patterns. Decisions were frequently made without complete discussion. Compromises from the wives were more demanded than from Kody himself, and her inputs were at times disregarded. Remember that moment when you feel your voice isn't being heard, not for being too soft, but for the fact that the system that surrounds you doesn't listen. That's precisely what Robyn experienced. And out of that quiet indignation, she began dreaming of a life that she didn't have to constantly bend or compromise in. A life where her happiness and choices counted just as much as anyone else's. Robyn's increasing skepticism were not born of rage, they were born of contemplation. She observed the tension Kody's choices created in the family, how the other wives reacted, and how arguments built up even when they tried to maintain harmony. Slowly, Robyn came to understand that her devotion, though admirable, had boundaries. Love alone could not resolve systemic problems or nagging pressures. Her mind began grappling with practical questions. What if I require more autonomy? What if my voice only counts when I demand it? Could I hold on to my peace and remain in this family? Picture yourself standing in a crowded room, surrounded by loved ones, but emotionally alone because the choices that impact you are beyond your reach. That's the space Robyn started inhabiting, a space where her serene public image hid an intense inner conflict. And it was in this subtle conflict that schemes for her possible independence started taking shape. As tensions mounted, Robyn began to confide in close friends and trusted relatives. These weren't tearful arguments or hysterical outbursts, just measured discussions probing what her life might be like if she were ever to leave. By discussing things with them, she started considering her options: financial independence, non-traditional living arrangements, and emotional impact on her children. She also considered timing, how and when she might be able to move out if exiting was the most viable option. This was planning, not betrayal. Robyn was not scheming up a public embarrassment or after drama. She was planning ahead as any considerate adult would when confronted with doubt within her personal life. Now imagine someone who appears utterly composed and collected on the surface, but beneath, they are rehearsing all possible scenarios to safeguard themselves. That is Robyn in her private self, always reflective, always guarded, and steadily preparing for a future that might turn out in any number of ways. Her devotion wasn't insincere, it was quantified, it was intentional, and it was being challenged by circumstances that nobody else completely realized. Even with all her forward planning, the tension on Robyn was apparent to those around her. There were little but significant indicators. She would occasionally retreat during conversations, pause before consenting to Kody's ideas, and sometimes convey quiet annoyance when domestic choices disregarded her input. These were not public outbursts. They were subtle signs that her patience and loyalty were being pushed. And in the end, the sum of these minor incidents uncovered an essential truth. Robyn would have to prioritize her own well-being if the family dynamic was going to remain as it was. Robyn cared about her children and cherished her position as a member of the family, but she also knew that being loyal without limits could cost her personally. The inner conflict was evident. She could remain the supportive, tranquil wife on television, or she could take a stand for herself and guard her emotional well-being. This internal conflict wasn't easy. Strategy, love, and loyalty clashed in ways that made every choice weigh heavily on the consequences. And although the cameras never picked up on this inner struggle, it was very real, affecting Robyn's actions and decisions daily. Picture living a life where every decision you make has emotional repercussions for the ones you love, but neglecting your own needs might leave you drained. That was the reality of Robyn's life. Her loyalty was being tried, not by people on the outside, but by the demands of living in a high-stakes, complicated family system. And the question she had to answer was simple but deep. Am I staying for love, or am I staying out of habit? It's apparent that Robyn wasn't blindly loyal. It was thoughtful, tested, and increasingly strained by circumstances that were out of her control. The tension within the Brown home wasn't simply about disagreements between Kody and the wives. It was about Robyn slowly realizing that her voice, her needs, and her future were as important as anyone else's. Did you ever have a secret that you guarded so well that no one, even the people closest to you, had the least suspicion? That's precisely what Robyn Brown started doing in secret. While folks saw her as the soothing, encouraging wife of Kody Brown, behind closed doors, she was secretly contemplating living a life that did not involve him. A life where her happiness, autonomy, and her children's well-being were paramount. This isn't a story of betrayal. It's a story of careful planning, strategy, and the quiet courage it takes to face uncertainty. Robyn wasn't acting impulsively. She was observing, reflecting, and preparing. And what she planned could have changed the Brown family dynamic forever. Today you'll see Robyn as she really was, thoughtful, calculating, and quietly taking control of her future while maintaining the appearance of loyalty. Robyn was aware that whatever choice she made would have implications, not merely for herself, but for the whole family. She observed how Kody treated the other wives, how conflicts were resolved, and how power was divided in the home. She saw a pattern: when her concerns were downplayed, when she was ignored, and when the tension of the home rested on everyone's shoulders, including hers. Instead of acting emotionally, Robyn started making notes about these observations in her mind. She would pose questions to herself, such as, if I had to leave, what would it do to my children? How would I ensure my independence? Was there a way that would preserve the family and yet preserve me? These were not simple questions, but they were appropriate for someone in her situation. Consider having to map out your life in secret, unbeknownst to anyone, and living each day like everything is fine. That's what Robyn was doing, methodically examining her situation, making risk assessments, and envisioning the future where what she decided actually counted. She was indeed loyal to Kody, but it wasn't unconditional. It was calculated, tactical, and subject to constant scrutiny. Robyn's planning extended beyond casual musings. She started thinking about concrete actions, money planning, space, and possibly living arrangements, should she ever need them. She even considered emotional preparation, how to justify her decisions to the kids, how to insulate herself from public criticism, and how to hold herself in dignity during it all. This period of her life was one of unobtrusive strength. In contrast to dramatic showdowns, Robyn's approach was stealthy. To everyone else, she was the calm, devoted wife, always supporting and advising Kody and the other wives. But privately she was developing a blueprint, a means of protecting her future without necessarily tearing things apart. Picture walking this tightrope between being calm and being loyal when planning secretly for an entirely new life. That takes emotional intelligence, the kind Robyn had. It wasn't simple. Every choice, Every discussion and every interaction was carefully considered. She had to be careful not to say anything wrong that would undo her scheme or reveal her uncertainties to the very people she wished to keep safe. Robyn's silent preparation sometimes revealed itself subtly. She became more careful about household finances, inquiring about family savings and household expenditures. She sought means to build her independence indirectly, such as learning new skills, keeping personal records, and silently weighing possibilities beyond the immediate control of the household. These actions weren't about mistrust, they were about foresight. Robyn understood that life can be unpredictable, and sometimes, even the strongest loyalty must be paired with preparedness. Her actions were small but deliberate, forming a safety net that could support her if circumstances changed. Picture someone quietly building a safety net while everyone believes they are just living normally. That's Robyn. Her plan wasn't about betrayal, it was about security, careful observation, and emotional readiness. She was preparing herself for a possibility many never imagined, all while keeping her public image intact. Carrying such a secret is draining. Robyn had her own doubts, guilt, and emotional burden. She loved her family so much, and the idea of leaving Kody hurt, but she also knew that denying her own needs could have long-term ramifications. This fine balance between loyalty and self-preservation was an ongoing emotional struggle. Robyn needed to balance her desire for loyalty with her own need for personal growth. And that tension, though not visible to the world, defined a great many of her decisions and interactions throughout this period. Imagine having life-changing choices to make silently, aware that each tiny action might transform relationships forever. That was Robyn's life. Her allegiance was challenged not by gossip or media attention, but by inner struggle between wanting to remain loyal and prioritizing her own survival. The courage it requires to battle that silently is phenomenal. It's evident that Robyn's poised, encouraging public face hid a richly reflective, strategic, and emotionally nuanced reality. She wasn't scheming betrayal, she was preparing for the uncertainties of life, safeguarding herself and her family in ways that audiences never witnessed. Have you ever encountered a moment so powerful it could alter everything you think you know about your life? A moment where all decision, all emotion, all thought, feels suddenly more burdensome than ever before. That's the kind of moment Robyn Brown lived behind closed doors. She had been quietly scheming, watching, and waiting for years for the day that she might have to leave Kody Brown. But then came a day when the tension she had been holding was no longer subtle. It insisted on being noticed. One family debate, one choice, one ignored voice. And Robyn suddenly saw that her allegiance could no longer be passive. What she chose to do next would determine not only her future, but the future of her kids and the Brown family at large. It was just an average evening, or so it appeared to be. The family came together to talk about domestic chores, property matters, and changes to family routines. To strangers, this would have been like any other Brown family discussion. But for Robyn, it was the point when all the silent resentments she had been harboring reached a boiling point. Kody, intent on his vision for the family, ignored objections from Robyn and other wives. Their views were dismissed, their voices silenced, and for Robyn, that was the turning point. She saw that whatever loyalty she continued to show, she had a plan that safeguarded her interests and well-being. Envision telling your truth and having it fall on deaf ears, not because you are mistaken, but because the institution surrounding you isn't listening. That was the time Robyn encountered. She was not furious. She was lucid. She understood that remaining silent without strategy could find her stuck, helpless, and drained. And that sight gave birth to resolute action, covertly and tactically. Robyn didn't make a dramatic exit or go head-to-head with Kody in front of everyone. She wasn't theatrical at this time, as planning had instilled in her the merit of subtlety. Rather, she started making her clandestine plan concrete. She went through her finances, her potential living situation, and when moves might be made. She thought about how to break any changes to her children, so they wouldn't have cause for irrational fear or confusion. What's amazing is that all of this planning was done behind the scenes. Viewers of the show never got to see the hours she spent thinking silently, reflecting, and strategizing her next move. But those hours mattered. They enabled Robyn to consider risks, predict outcomes, and make decisions that kept both her family safe and herself safe too. Imagine a person smiling, talking calmly, and involved in family life secretly preparing for a life-changing choice. That is Robyn here. Everything was calculated, each word weighed, and each encounter mapped out. She was faithful, but this was active faithfulness, active loyalty, weighed against the actuality of her existence. Even as she made quiet preparations, Robyn felt an intense emotional tension. Loyalty isn't merely about remaining. Loyalty is about weighing love, duty, and self-respect. She loved Kody, she loved her children, and she cherished the family they had created. But she also knew that neglecting her own needs might one day bear consequences. The emotional burden was heavy. Robyn struggled with feelings of guilt for entertaining the ideas of leaving, worry about how any alteration would impact her children, and trepidation about how the family would handle if her schemes ever came to light. It was a fine balancing act, keeping up appearances while secretly choreographing a future that threatened to derail everything. Consider holding on to a secret that might alter the direction of your family's life, but staying cool and collected in the presence of all. That was Robyn. The courage it must have required to contain that stress, to balance love and devotion with self-interest, is admirable. And it reveals a side of her that fans do not get to see often. A side characterized by quiet strength and calculated wit. Even when outwardly composed, Robyn's hidden cues started to emerge. She was more considered in conversation, more measured with words, and at times paused before concurring with Kody's choices. These small movements went unseen by the majority of viewers, but for those intimately familiar with her, gave a glimpse into her inner conflict and preparation. She also became more proactive in ensuring her independence. Small steps, like keeping separate financial records, considering alternative living arrangements, and quietly planning for her children's needs, reflected a readiness that could only have come from months of careful thought and quiet planning. Picture secretly laying the groundwork for your future while the world thinks you are all in on the now. That was Robyn. Her commitment to Kody stayed, but it came alongside prudence, self-awareness, and a willingness to care for herself, if the moment ever arose. It wasn't betrayal, it was survival, savvy and love in its most intricate form. We observe Robyn at a critical juncture. The drama has been building to its climax, and her personal scheme is all but complete. She's a woman of conflicted feelings, weighing love and allegiance against her desire for personal health. She hasn't moved yet, but she's ready, reflective and quietly resilient. Picture yourself at a turning point, where each decision seems like it may alter your life for good. That was where Robyn Brown was. After all those years of subtle observation, meticulous planning, and emotional readiness, she hadn't moved rashly or publicly called out Kody Brown. Rather, she had put herself in a position to make choices that guarded her future while maintaining the family she cherished. But here's the twist. Her quiet, careful loyalty, her measured, almost invisible planning, had consequences. It didn't just shape her life, it shaped the dynamics of the entire Brown family. Today we'll explore the fallout of Robyn's choices, the ripple effects on her relationship with Kody and the other wives, and the surprising ways she maintained control over her own life without causing chaos. Although Robyn didn't speak out directly to Kody, her secret planning had a subtle but strong influence on the family. She spoke more deliberately, was stronger in asserting her needs, and was more considerate of her children's well-being. This quiet effect frequently changed home decisions unbeknownst to those involved. Kody, intent on his dream for the family, started to see Robyn as no longer pushable aside. Her say mattered, her worries were heard, and her presence became a calming influence in disputes. Consider the subtle strength it takes to win big arguments without getting loud. That was Robyn. She didn't need to become dramatic or confrontational. Her planning, patience, and reflective strategies enabled her to shape results while being loyal, calm, and composed. That's a kind of power that few ever see, but it's very effective. Robyn's deliberate planning also extended to her interactions with the other wives. Whereas other wives were more reactive or expressive of emotion, Robyn's measured response placed her as a level-headed mediator. She could provide guidance, encouragement, and insight without fueling conflict. Her devotion, though aware and calculated, also won the family's trust. She trusts herself with tense dialogue, provides wise solutions, and guards her children's emotional well-being. In a home where interests conflict and dynamics matter, her silent, calculated decisions deter further chaos. It must have been something to be the one everyone relied on to keep things balanced, even when your own fate was in doubt. That was Robyn's role. Her placid facade concealed months of soul-searching planning, but its effect was clear. She was a silent anchor in a family storm, showing that loyalty and intelligence and forethought may coexist beautifully. Despite all her planning, Robyn also felt the emotional burden of what she was doing. She cared about Kody and wanted to preserve the family they had built. Leaving was never an aspiration, but a contingency. Her planning enabled her to be faithful while protecting her own well-being. But this loyalty was emotionally complex. Each choice, each interaction, each subtle cue had repercussions. Robyn had to constantly navigate her own feelings, the demands of Kody, and the dynamic with the other wives. It was a juggling act that demanded patience, empathy, and incredible emotional. Imagine walking on a tightrope between duty and self-interest, aware that one wrong move might blow up your family. That was Robyn's everyday life. Her planning wasn't only safeguarding her, it enabled her to be an engaged, stabilizing member of the Brown family, without giving up her. That sort of patience doesn't happen often, and that's what makes her tale so engaging. Robyn's ability to bring stability to the Brown family, while scheming in the background, represents a unique strength. She wasn't only a passive player, she was a thoughtful, active partner within a difficult family situation. Her plan made sure that her children were emotionally safe. Her relationships with the other wives functioned as you, and Kody valued her opinion more than ever. By preparing in the background, she avoided unnecessary drama, protected her independence, and kept her position in the family on her own terms. To imagine being able to steer the direction of a family without ruffling a feather, while at the same time strategizing your own is the power Robyn wielded. She harmonized loyalty with foresight, love with self-preservation, and emotional intelligence with planning. It's a lesson in quiet power and cautious decision-making that few get to witness. Robyn's tale is a strong reminder that loyalty need not be blind obedience. Her careful, thoughtful approach enabled her to remain a loyal wife, while preserving her own emotional and practical interests. She managed complicated family situations, shaped decisions in the home, and provided for the welfare of her children, all without creating public chaos or undermining the trust of her family.